Hey all, and welcome. It is great to see so many people at this virtual event. I could see people logging in, so this is going to be a super awesome night. Let me just give you a plan for the evening. We're going to start with some brief introductions, and then we will get straight to talking with Patrick, who is here and ready. And then hopefully we're going to have some time for questions, which you will be able to put into the chat when the time comes. If you have logged into this talk and your name looks like not your name, that is a glitch some people are experiencing, for which I apologize, but we will try to track those questions in the chat no matter what. So my name is Melissa Gregory, and I'm professor of English and associate dean for the College of Arts and Letters here at the University of Toledo. And I want to welcome all of you to the first event in our new series, Tell Me Your Story, Careers in the Liberal Arts. Patrick is going to be our inaugural speaker. Special thanks to everyone at the University of Toledo who supported this event, including Dean Charlene Gilbert and all of the promotion folks who helped me to get the word out, and also John Eidmiller, who is currently managing our Zoom. So by way of background, I just want to tell you that this series was occasioned by a question that I often get from parents of prospective college students, which is, what do you do? What do you do with a major in the liberal arts, right? Many years in higher education have taught me that it can often be easier for people to understand the one-to-one relationship between a degree in something like pharmacy and becoming a pharmacist than it is for them to imagine how students with degrees in subjects like history or anthropology or theater or English or French or political science or sociology and so forth can successfully sort of launch themselves into the world. And the reality, of course, is that liberal arts majors do, in fact, live really meaningful lives and find exciting careers. But my hope was that this series would help to demonstrate the ways in which such majors find their path by bringing in guests to tell their stories. So with that, I'm very honored to introduce our guest tonight, Mr. Patrick Vassel. Because we're going to learn a lot about Patrick's story in the next 45 minutes or so, I'm going to forego delivering a more comprehensive biography that I normally would. So Patrick, please don't forgive me. I do not mean at all to seem rude. You know, normally I would say, oh, Patrick Vassel, you know, hails from this area, but I think we're going to learn all of those things. So what I would just like to tell everybody tonight is that Patrick is an extremely successful playwright and director with several great Broadway credits to his name. And I'm sure that the credit that's probably most recognizable to people who've logged in here tonight is that Patrick currently serves as the associate and supervising director of Hamilton. And I'm going to assume that that's a musical that doesn't need any introduction. I don't need to give you any background about it. So before we kind of get to the story of how Patrick came to Hamilton, I was actually wondering, Patrick, could you explain to everybody, just by way of framing this, like what it means to be an associate and supervising director so that everyone understands that job?
Sure. Yeah. First of all, thanks so much for having me. I'm so happy to be here, and I am always thrilled to do events like this and talks like this because, and we'll get to this part, but I had a pretty good idea by the time I was done with college that I wanted to be a theater director, but I had no idea how to go about that. And so if I had had the chance to talk to somebody who maybe knew a little bit more than I did back then, it would have been really helpful. So hopefully there's some things I can share that are helpful tonight. But yeah, so I mean, the thing that I try to say about my job is for anybody that's ever done theater before, or even if you haven't, the job of a director is really very much depends on what the show is. And so the job of the associate director also very much depends on what the show is and who the director is. So there are some directors who have associates and they are just there to take notes and get coffee, and that's all they do, and they don't have any creative input. And then there are other associates who will stay with the director for many, many years and will be a really meaningful part of the creation of new work. I've been working on Hamilton with Tommy Kail since 2014, the first time that we put the show up on its feet in a workshop. I had worked with Tommy previously on a show called Magic Bird that we will talk about at some point. But when I first worked with Tommy, it was, I think, much more assistant. And then the second time around, I had the chance, especially because we were kind of, we had more time in the development for me to be involved in the creation of Hamilton. And so early in those days, it's very much whatever the show needs, whatever Tommy needs, very much just being kind of attached to him. A lot of the work of my job in the creation of the show was really in tech and previews, when you go from 30 cast members in a room, in a rehearsal room, to a full band and designers and assistants and theater staff, and just too many people for the director to talk to. So that's really where an associate becomes important, to be able to get notes out to everybody in the building, and to be taking those notes each night with Tommy. Now, over time, as things have kind of grown, we now have 5 North American companies. We have a UK company, and a lot of my work this year, actually stretching back into last year, is preparing next year. We're looking to open a company in Australia in the spring, and a German language production of Hamilton, Das Musical, in the fall. And so a lot of my job in the years since those early days has been casting. I'm pretty, that's a lot of my hours are spent in the casting process. Ultimately, all of our casts are approved by our original creative team. But the process of seeing people multiple times over the years and putting them forward to be approved is a big part of my job. And then each company of Hamilton has a resident director, and those are folks that I have hired with Tommy and trained and support. And that's really how I think of it, is that those are the people that are teaching, new cast members, understudies. They're watching the show every week. They're sending me their notes. They're really the people that are in the buildings where Hamilton is happening. And it's my job to just make sure that they have everything that they need to do that at a high level. And in more normal times, I'm traveling quite a bit, checking in on all of those companies, and just making sure everybody has what they need to do the show at the same level that we first performed it back in 2014, 2015. So it continues to evolve. But, and I guess the last piece would be these last couple of companies, and as we look to these international companies, Tommy's unlikely to travel, and in the last couple of companies, he will come in for a very late preview or pretty close to opening night, just to share his thoughts and see how we're doing. But the entire rehearsal process at this point is very much in my hands, which a great honor and responsibility that Tommy has passed on as he goes on to make Fosse Verdon, and he's directing a new movie version of Fiddler, and the many other projects that he's got going.
So that sounds great. So thank you. Yeah, and that sounds like incredibly exciting work. I'm very envious in the responsibility of casting. I'm sure I'm not alone in being a secret, like sort of, the casting is one of my fantasies, to recast all the movies the way I want to. All right. So thank you so much. Let's just talk a little bit about how you got from, where you started to the job that you just described, which sounds so rich and interesting. For those of you who maybe don't know that much about Patrick, you may be really excited to learn that he actually is an Ohio native, and he's pretty close. Like, you grew up in Akron, which is only a couple short hours from Toledo. So I was wondering if you could just tell us a little bit about what it was like to grow up in Akron. Did you assume you were going to end up on Broadway? How did that work?
No, I did not assume that at all. No, I grew up in Akron, and I have an older sister who's quite a bit. She's 6 years older, so she was, I always kind of idolized her, and I have a younger brother who's 4 years younger, which is a tricky age difference for any of you with siblings. My brother and I did not always get along growing up, and it's funny. I feel very fortunate that in all actuality, my parents didn't put very much pressure on me to go in any particular direction or to do any particular thing. Somehow, somewhere, I don't know exactly where it came from, but I, in my childhood mind, put a lot of pressure on myself to succeed. So I was pretty competitive academically, and I played a lot of sports. So my dad was always playing basketball in different leagues in Akron, and sports were a big part of my life growing up. But I definitely sort of had this concept of needing to succeed and needing to do well. I grew up in a big Irish Catholic family, so I ultimately ended up going to the University of Notre Dame, which is kind of 2 hours on the other side of Toledo. And that was, again, not something that was necessarily sort of ingrained in me or expected of me, but it sort of came to be something that, a goal or a dream of my own. So that was sort of I think, those were the things in my mind. And then the first theatrical thing I ever did was when I was in 7th grade. There was my 7th and 8th grade years. I think it was some parents. We didn't really have a theater program. There were no theater classes in my middle school, but some parents got together and decided to do, in 7th grade, it was Alice in Wonderland. I played the Mock Turtle. I was painted green. um, and but theater was like, it was like sports to me. I didn't really think I was ever going to be a professional athlete. It was just something that you did. It was just another extracurricular on my way to high school. And the the stories that sort of connect and kind of launch me into the next sort of chapter of this are, when I was 13, there was a summer basketball camp that I signed up for, and it was at it was affiliated with the high school that I ended up going to. And that was the first time that I played basketball with and got to know LeBron James, who is my same age and also grew up in Akron, Ohio. And we played in these basketball camps together and ended up going to the same high school. And my freshman year at St. Vincent St. Mary, I played, I made the team and played basketball. And it was, looking back, it was actually kind of, it was one of my first experiences of when something that you think you love, you get to the point where it's, you wonder about loving it, and you wonder about the fun of it. Because to stay on that team, which won the state championship my freshman year, was pretty competitive. So heading into my sophomore year, I decided that I wasn't likely to get any taller and wasn't likely to get any much better than I was. There were already some kids that were about my size that were way better than I was. So the reason that I mention it, in addition to just the novelty of it, is it made a logistic difference in my life, because I went from my freshman year, where I was kind of 5 a.m. shoot arounds and after school study halls and everything just to stay on the team, to then I had all this time. And so that was actually sort of what led me to audition for the spring musical my sophomore year, was because I had all of that time back. And at that point, when I was in middle school, I played everything. I played soccer and football and basketball and baseball. But in high school, it's a lot more of a time commitment. And St. Vincent St. Mary is a big sports high school. For any of you that are in Ohio, it's always had a big football program and basketball program. And so it was pretty tricky to play anything casually. And my sister had done the high school musicals. And so I auditioned for Fair Lady and got the part of Henry Higgins, which was great because he doesn't really sing. And I didn't then, I don't now. So, but again, I did high school theater the rest of my time at St. Vincent St. Mary, but I didn't have any concept. We didn't grow up going to like even Playhouse Square or like seeing any of the touring musicals. I didn't know about any of that. It was just kind of another thing to do that I did.
Yeah. So that's those are many great stories. I like it that you played with LeBron James. And you're like, I'm going back to that Mock Turtle. Although it sounds like Henry Higgins is a step up from that. Can I just ask, was that, in terms of takeaways, that's a really huge change to go from being somebody who's gearing up to be kind of a lifelong athlete to not doing those things. Was that scary? Or it seems like it was worth it, but did it feel weird at the time, or it's just like, oh no, I'm moving on?
I remember, this is like another place that I can thank my parents. Like I remember having and it's funny now that I'm talking about it, it's reminding me of a story that never comes up just because it was too it precedes this and I don't think of it. But there was a Notre Dame alum who is a lawyer in Akron who ran I actually have no idea, but he started the CYO, the Catholic Youth Organization football league in Akron. He started a team that was super competitive, like very intense, 6th, 7th, and 8th grade. Actually, you could play in fifth, you could start in fifth grade, but you didn't play in the game. You just sort of like were part of like the training sort of squad. I played football, and then I got to the point which was very similar with basketball, where it just wasn't fun anymore. I wasn't good enough, and it was way too hard for like I knew what the fun version felt like, and as it got to a certain level of competition, that stopped. And it's interesting that again, these are not things I normally think of, but they are definitely, that instinct has been very useful throughout my life, and will come up in some other places in this story of like really just paying attention to when I got to a point where I was like, this just isn't, I'm not enjoying this.
Right.
Why am I spending my time doing it? And sort of conversely, I loved theater. It came really naturally. It was really fun. I liked I liked kind of everything about it. And so I wasn't, I suppose I should say, for the, especially for the purpose of this conversation, that all kind of lived in like one part of my brain in life. And then the other part of my brain in life was like, get the best grades that you can, so you can go to a good school and you can get a good job and you won't be poor and alone forever. Like that sort of anxiety was very present, but they were different parts. I didn't see them as ever intersecting at the time.
That's interesting. Yeah, that's a good message, I think, for all of us, in the sense that if something lacks all pleasure, like once it becomes devoid of joy, then maybe it's not what you want to do. Could we maybe sort of stick with that sense of working really hard? My understanding is that you were a first generation college student, and for people in the audience, that means when the kids go to college, but their parents did not, right? And that can sometimes come with special responsibilities and burdens. And when you talk about how hard you wanted to work and succeed, I was wondering, is that a part of being first generation, or were there other parts of that experience? Did you notice it when you were at school? I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, again, I think like that was sort of where that my anxieties at the time, or my sort of drive to, um, because neither of my parents went to college. My dad had like a pretty stable sales job working for a hardwood flooring company when I was growing up, but he actually, in staying on a theme, he got to a point that he decided he wanted to strike out on one, and so he started his own company where he was looking to basically fix up different properties in the Akron area and rent them out. And he's always been really handy, and was interested in sort of building and construction. But that was a brand new thing, and so and it was a venture of his own, which meant that by the time and it was right around when I was in junior high going into high school, so it was kind of like right as I was sort of starting to think about college and where things were going to go. There was even more kind of financial stress and pressure. And my mom, when I was growing up, she never worked, and then she got a job, and so, and all that to say, we were very safely middle class. Like I went to a Catholic grade school, Catholic high school, but there was this sense, I always had this sense that I was going to pay for college. Like that wasn't something that my parents were in a position to be able to do. So whatever it cost, or whatever the loans were, those were going to be on me. And so that energy and that kind of drive well enough to kind of get the scholarships or financial aid, and to go to a school that would sort of put me in a place to succeed. Yeah, that was all very, very real. And my sister went to St. Mary's College, which was right across from Notre Dame, so I think that's part of what drew me and sort of felt comfortable about it. But she had the misfortune of graduating in the spring of 2001 and moving to Chicago in September of 2001, just like within a week of September 11th. And so, the economy completely collapsed. There were no jobs anywhere. And within a couple of months, she had to move home. And so I had seen kind of what could happen if, through no fault of her own, she didn't do anything wrong. She just happened to sort of graduate at the wrong time. And so, she ended up getting a great job in Akron that took her all over the world, and she's fine and great. But I definitely, that sort of pressure of just like, you're kind of got to figure it out, was a big motivator for me, for sure.
Yeah, and something that I think we can all relate to a lot right now, since we are not in a real economic recovery, hardly. So so you majored in, but you went off to college and you did not major in theater, right? It was
No.
like, oh, this will be the thing that will will take me out. You majored in political science. Was that your first choice? Did you switch majors, or were you just like, nope, it's got to be political science?
No, I always planned. So by the time I graduated high school, I had gotten pretty political, and um, the was all very motivated by the sense that I had then and now of um, I've always been interested in just sort of, what can I do to help? What can I do to make things better? And so at the time, I was very enamored of the idea that, well, politics, that's the only way. You have to,
Mhm.
either work in politics or run for office or, I was pretty electorally focused. I don't think that I knew enough about the workings of government to think of, things like city departments or, state agencies or anything like that. I was pretty focused on elected office. So yeah, but when I went off to Notre Dame, I my thought was political science, maybe probably go to law school.
Mhm.
That was absolutely the plan. And it very one of my first days on campus, I saw a flyer for auditions for a theater production, and I wandered in an audition the same way that I did in high school. I didn't really think of it at all. And I never really considered, even when I started taking theater classes, I never considered majoring in it because um, I had no concept of it as a career. And I thought political science was going to kind of take me to where my career was headed.
Political science is a career. Theater can't possibly be a career.
Yeah,
Although
yeah, yeah.
it's interesting that I feel like there's a lot of theater in politics too, right? So it seems as if there is a through line. Um, just to kind of stick really quickly with the political science, I have to ask about this because he's one of my political crushes. My understanding is that you interned with Sherrod Brown.
Yeah, yeah. No, it was amazing. It was so yeah, at the time it was my congressman, and so Notre Dame had this great domestic study abroad program where you could do a semester in Washington D.C. and they would help you kind of find an internship. And because you were kind of paying everything you would normally pay, and they're providing housing and everything kind of as the university, you could find an internship like on the Hill and not have to worry about whether or not it was going to be paid or whether like how that was going to work. And so and I don't know if this is still true, but at the time those internships were very much prioritized for people by district. So you had to have you couldn't really apply necessarily, or you wouldn't be prioritized if you didn't live in the district. So it's funny looking back, I don't think that was a particularly difficult internship to get because the number of people who lived in that congressional district that were going to be in DC for the semester was pretty low. The other interns went to school, you see. And yeah, it was a really remarkable education and experience. I opened my eyes to so many things, and I I am so grateful for that experience. And prior to that, between my freshman and sophomore years, I was lucky enough to spend the summer in Boston interning for the Democratic Convention. So I spent that summer at the convention, and then that fall semester I was back on campus at Notre Dame, and then in the spring I went to DC with Sharon.
Mhm. Okay. And I'm sure he was really great too.
He's
Right?
truly the best, truly the best. And I guess the other things that I would say are that looking back on that, my like political philosophies and ideas and sort of what I understood about the world were very much still forming. And so I look back, like I can remember some of the moments. Like, I mean, one of the most jarring is, I was 20 years old, right? Like, what did I know? And going into that congressional office, they have like they had like a lot of signs and things from different events and like protests that he had led, and a lot of them were like ripping apart the Clinton administration. And I was like, what? Like, I thought we were all Democrats here. Like, what's going on? Like, I had no idea the history of his life. I came to learn it, but it was and I don't know what he's like in the Senate, but in the House, he did not wear shoes and was padding around in his socks and would wander back and you know get into really amazing conversations. And his staff was really remarkable. And all that said, I will say that that was a pivotal experience for me, ultimately deciding not to pursue politics because, that spring, Bush was inaugurated and for a second term. And I very much experienced how hard that entire office was working to just get an inch, like to just, it was really, I was so glad I did that internship, and really that's kind of the story of my, I could talk more about it, but the value of my political science degree in some ways is that it convinced me at the end of those 4 years that I should not go into politics. um, so that was a big part of it. I loved every minute of it, but it was good that I was able to do that as an undergrad and not try to launch into that after graduation.
Yeah, it sounds like, I mean, you described it as an instinct, but it sounds like you're very good at sort of self-assessing, right? Where it's just like, this is no longer, this is not the fit that I thought it would be, or that you have the ability to, I think, not to follow the path you think you should be on just because someone told you, or you told yourself at some earlier point that this is the path you should be on, right? Which is a really great skill to learn. It's one of the ways it seems like that we don't become unhappy people is sticking, with something that we don't like because we think we have to for some reason. But so, okay, but so you graduate from college, you had an internship, you were all set to enter politics. I mean, like, what did you decide to do? Were you panicking in your senior year or what?
Yeah, a little bit. Yeah. Yeah. So, the other, so the I guess other pieces that like big important things when I was in college were,
Mm,
after Sherrod, I interned for Joe Donnelly, who at the time was running. I worked for two congressional campaigns for him. So I came in at the tail end of one, which he was unsuccessful, and then I was able to fully intern with the second time that he were the House at the time. Joe would go on, he won that race, and then he would go on to the Senate. He lost that Senate seat subsequently, but that so by the time I was at senior year, I had experience on the Hill, I had experience in a convention, and I had experience on a campaign. And I graduated in 2007, so that was the primary year heading into 2008. It was a perfect time to pack up and go volunteer in Iowa or whatever. But going back to what I was talking about in high school, I didn't have any money. Like I was, I've had a job since I was 14, but that was always to like pay for things. It was like, if I didn't work, I didn't have a car, I didn't have, I couldn't eat, I didn't have anything. And so I was very in touch with and connected to people that were going out to the primaries. But the way that it works is like you go volunteer for a while and you hope they add you on staff. And if they do, it's not a lot of money. So it's pretty scrappy and pretty tricky if you don't have the resources. So that was part of my kind of, I don't think this is the way that I should go. Or really honestly, like I was like, I don't think I can. I don't like, unless I'm applying for something that's like, here's how much you will make, and that's how you will pay your loans. This isn't going to work. But the magical thing about the thing that about theater at Notre Dame is that it's I don't know if anybody knows this about Notre Dame, not an art school historically, known for many things, not typically the fine or performing arts. But the thing that's great about that is that it is a school that has a bunch of resources and has a really vibrant student theater scene. And
mm,
so the way that I learned how to direct is that I started out, performing in department shows, but the department only does like 4 shows a year. The
mm,
student theater groups will do 20, over the course of the year. And there's really no rules or limitations on it. So there's all of these clubs that get funding, and they can apply for the rights and rent at the, reserve. You don't even have to rent it. You don't pay, you just have to reserve the space. And so I performed in a lot of productions that my older friends, and still to this day, my best friends, were seniors when I was a freshman. And so by the time I got to my sophomore, junior year, I started directing, and it was a great education because you have to do everything. You have to find designers on a campus with no design program, and you have to find, uh, choose plays that you think are good and cast them and sell tickets. You have to do, all parts of it in an environment where you're not going to get a lot of those resources readily. So you just have to learn and figure it out. So by the time I was senior, going back to what I mentioned at the beginning, I had a pretty good hunch I wanted to be a theater director. But when I was talking to my professors in the theater department, or like anyone really, the only answer I got was grad school. I was like, well, I guess you can go to grad school. It's like, I don't really want to go to grad school. I'm pretty ready to be out of here.
Yeah.
So I sort of half-heartedly applied to some grad schools that I never followed through on. And to be honest, I was a really good candidate for Teach for America, which is what I ended up doing. Teach for America recruiters were pretty active on campus, and their message was kind of, want to change the world, want to make a difference, and not sure how. Like, come Teach for America. And it's like, yeah, that's me. Sounds good. And you know, looking back, I guess I would say that part of my panic was I had put all my eggs in this political science basket, right? So like if I had really wanted to like find a job in politics, I probably could have. But at the time, I was pretty panicked that, my school, my friends in, the business school or in finance were kind of, fielding offers left and right. And I ended up applying for Teach for America. At the same time, I wasn't sure jumping in front of a classroom was going to be the best thing for me or for those students. I worked really hard in college and I was pretty exhausted. So I found a job on the Teach for America website in communications, and I applied for that at the same time as I applied for the teaching job. And then I got both, and they didn't like that I had done that. And so we had to have some conversations, because they're sort of different parts of the organization. They didn't
Right,
they
right.
didn't know that that had happened. But they were great. I explained to them why I felt like, the communications job was like, you will work in New York City at, our headquarters and make a, entry level nonprofit salary. And that will be a way that you can, graduate and know that like you'll be okay. Like this is like it felt solid. And that's kind of why I chose it.
Yeah, you've got a couple of benefits. You can,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. So then you get to New York City, right?
Mhm.
So how you're in your entry level job. How do you move from there to theater in New York? I mean, on the one hand, there's tons of theater in New York. On the other hand, it's not always that easy to break into it. So what did you do?
No, I mean, it's funny looking back because the Teach for America offices at the time, now they're downtown, but at the time they were literally around the corner from like Ripley Greer and like the Broadway rehearsal studios where everyone rehearses. I could not have been closer. I was two buildings away, but I had no idea. I think I lived in New York for a good year and a half, maybe even 2 years before I saw my first Broadway show.
Mhm.
It just didn't. I was kind of, I think, too focused on like living and surviving in New York, which is a thing. um,
It's a big
and I
change.
loved it. Yeah, I loved New York. I was having a great time, but again, I think once I sort of left theater behind, I had no sense that it was likely to come back. That I only worked at that communications job for a year. It went by really quickly, and it was important because it was a job that taught me that I didn't want to work in an office, that I didn't want to work at a cubicle. It always ages and dates me, but that was the age of Blackberries, and I had a Blackberry, and I had a little cubicle and an open floor plan situation, and this in former industrial building. It was very hip at the time, and it was a great team and a great organization, but that like commuting in every day and from Brooklyn, and I just didn't like that lifestyle. I just like really didn't, because it's like you're working, but like you're spending a lot of your time just like on, at the time, GChat, and just like messing around and figuring out like what your plans are going to be. And I was like, this is not for me. This is not. I can't. I will go crazy if I stay here. And so, fortunately, I was able to again sort of go back to my bosses at Teach for America and say, hey, I really appreciate this. I will finish the year, but if that teaching offer is still on the table, I would love to take you up on that. And at that point, I was like, okay, I live in New York. I know, I've sort of set up my life here, and now I feel like I can step into the classroom. And so they placed me in a school in Brooklyn, in Flatbush, not too far from where I was living, and that's what jumped me into education, which was very all-consuming, for sure. The Teach for America experience is pretty intense, so
Yeah.
diving into 6 weeks of training and then working on your master's degree at night and on the weekends for those first 2 years while I was special education teacher. It was my certification. It was a K-8 school, so I started out K-4, and my principal very smartly noticed that I was much more successful with the older students, so moved me up to middle school, and then I was teaching 5th through 8th grade support services and special education.
Mhm. And so, and so you're doing that.
You don't see where the theater connection is
I'm
yet?
still waiting. I feel like I cannot bridge this gap. I don't, where does it happen?
So yeah, so basically I loved teaching. I felt very lucky to be at my school. It checked a lot of boxes for me, and it certainly felt um the going the through sort of like fulfillment and joy. For me, it's very connected to, am I actually making a difference? If I'm not really in a position to make much of a difference, I get pretty unhappy pretty fast. So like I have to feel like what I'm doing is actually meaningful. And so I mean, if anybody's ever taught or tutored or anything, like like that's it doesn't get much more meaningful than that, of like spending time with students, especially my students who really needed the most help. So it was very fulfilling for lots of reasons. But my 3rd year of teaching, so like the Teach for America commitment's 2 years. Year 3, the nights and weekends master's program falls away, and now I had a lot of my life back. And a lot of my friends who were actors in college had gone away to grad school, and now we're landing back in the city in our
Yeah.
kind of mid-20s and starting to audition for stuff. So I just got to the point where I realized if I didn't try, if I, in a few years prior, I didn't know how to try, and now I was in a position where I was like, I still don't know how to try, but at least I'm in New York and I know some actors, and let's see what we can do. And so that was really what I did. Was I went up, I started just all of my actor friends. I started to just mention to them, I think I want to try directing or figure out how to direct, or I don't exactly know. I'll assist, I'll help out, whatever you got. Just let me know if you know any directors that would be looking for someone. And I got lucky pretty early. One of my friends from college was in a production up in Albany that a bunch of us went up to see, and I loved the show. And I just asked him if he'd connect me with the director, and he did, with a lovely email. And this director and I met for lunch, and his name is Gordon Greenberg. And Gordon started performing on Broadway when he was a kid. So he'd been in the industry kind of his whole life. And the amazing and wonderful thing that he did, and something I think of all the time whenever I'm thinking about mentorship, is that he knew I was a full-time teacher. So my schedule was pretty limited, but he would just CC me emails, and he would just invite me to whatever he was doing. So if it was a one-day reading, or if it was a tour, or whatever it was, he would just sort of say, just come and I'll say you're my assistant. Like, you can just be in the room, just come. And that was a really magical thing. And he had a number of different projects that he would have me research or work on. All of this is unpaid, but it was really invaluable for me to.
I was gonna
Yeah.
ask, yeah, but that's really, I mean, that's interesting, because it almost sounds like you're an entrepreneur or something, in the sense that you're like, I'll just give me a job and I will do the job, and I'm basically going to work for free for a while to learn what I need to learn and make connections, right? And then that sort of helps. So I don't know. So how did that get into, how did that get into paid work?
So I met him in the fall of that would have been 2011, and I at that point, I basically that school year, that's what we would do. And then by the spring, he was sort of like, look, if you really want a job, if you want the paid work, that's like, most rehearsal schedules are 10 to 6 days a week. So he was like, I need you to be available for that. So that led me to decide to leave my school and sort of jump into the unknown of freelancing. Which of course, as soon as like we had that conversation and I made that decision, I was like, so what do you have this fall? And he was like, nothing. It's like, great, awesome, that's amazing. And but I knew I needed to do that. I needed to not be on a school schedule. And so I I got my school to agree to hire me as kind of like a priority substitute, where like they would call me before they would call the agency that staffs substitute teachers. And then I just cobbled together every teaching artist teaching anything that I could to pay the bills while I was working with Gordon and starting to try to figure out what I wanted to make or what I wanted to do on my own. Around that time, I had seen In the Heights on Broadway, and it completely blew my mind. I'd never seen a musical like that. I'd never seen theater like that. and certainly for someone that had just moved to New York and fallen in love with New York, to see that show was like, it just felt, it felt really groundbreaking. And so I went 6 or 7 times. I took all of my students at the time, all 80 middle schoolers, we all went. And so I knew that like those were the people that I was hoping to maybe get to work with. And somewhere in there, I think, you know, a night out to dinner or something, with Gordon, Jeffrey Seller joined us. And I realized that Gordon and Jeffrey were very good personal friends. And Jeffrey produced Rent and Avenue Q and In the Heights and ultimately Hamilton. And so that flipped a switch in my brain, and I found the right moment to ask Gordon just for Tommy Kahle's email address. I was like, you don't have to introduce us. We, you know, I don't need you to make a connection, but if you wouldn't mind, you know, I'd love to reach out to him and just kind of chat. And so he did. And I wrote Tommy an email cold. And at that point I had seen Heights, I'd seen Lombardi, which he did on Broadway. He did a couple of shows at Lincoln Center. And I just wrote to him and said, I think I really am inspired by what I see in your work, and I would love to get lunch or something if you're willing. And he wrote back and we got lunch and we hit it off. And he said, look, I don't have any work for you, but just keep in touch. And somehow between that summer and that winter, I found every 4 to 6 weeks, I tried not to bother him too much, but I would just sort of find a reason to, he grew up playing sports as well. He also didn't go to school for theater. So we kind of connected on a lot of kind of baseline levels. And I guess I kept in touch the right amount. And he called me about 6 months later and said, the same producers as Lombardi are putting together a show about Larry Bird and Magic Johnson called Magic Bird. And do you want to be my assistant? And, you know, I was standing outside the apartment of a student that I was tutoring at the time, which was like the only way that I could pay my bills was this one student. I was like, I'm not going to be tutoring the student anymore. I'm going to Broadway, and this is like, you know, basketball, and my dad's going to come to opening night. It's going to be amazing. And it was a really amazing experience on a play that was not ready. They sort of thought they had a formula with Lombardi, and we rushed that play to Broadway way too fast. But it taught me a lot, and it was an amazing experience, and a really important thing about it, and what led to, I think, ultimately to Hamilton, is Tommy and I are very, very similar humans and artists, and so it wasn't difficult. You know, and I guess I should contrast that with, like, Gordon is a brilliant director, but we are very different, and so our relationship was much more sort of complementary. Gordon did certain things that were, you know, his thing, and then I was able to sort of complement them with what I was good at. Tommy and I are sort of like, I don't have to question like, well, I think this, but what would Tommy think? Like, it's, the instincts are very similar. And the design team for Magic Bird turned out to be the exact design team for Hamilton. So I got to know a lot of people really well during doing Magic Bird. And I mentioned the rushing it to Broadway. For all of the, you know, Broadway debut, all of the excitement, all of the energy around that, the show closed 3 weeks after opening. And so I was right back to tutoring and hustling. And it's actually, that led me to ultimately decide to go back to the classroom full time. After like 2.5 years of freelancing, I was like, all right, I think I know how theater works. And one of the really important lessons that I learned is that at the moment, the only place to actually kind of make a living in American theater is Broadway. So if you don't have a Broadway hit, or you're not working regularly on Broadway, you don't have health insurance. You're not probably saving any money. And so I felt like I had made some connections and knew a little bit about what I was doing. And so I called my school, and they amazingly had a teacher who was on maternity leave that decided not to come back. And so they needed someone, and the students at that time were in 6th grade going into 7th, and I had started teaching them when they were in 2nd grade. So I knew all of these students already. I knew the families. And that fall, I went into, that was 2013. I went into that school year, and I had a reading of a play that I wrote with a friend at the Public, and I directed a thing in the Fringe, and I had another little workshop, and I was teaching, and I was like, I remember going home to Akron that Christmas, and I was like, okay, I think this is the plan. I think this is what we're going to do. And it was that February of 2014 that Tommy called me a voicemail, because it was during the school day, that said, Vassel, it's Kale, call me, I'm about to change your life. And he did.
That's awesome. I love it that you cold called a lot, right? I mean, that you did cold calls and that you kind of, again, a lot of hustle to sort of make those connections and stay in there. You can't be passive if you want to break into a new scene. And also that sort of tension between like living as an artist, but also needing some stability, needing some benefits. Like, how do you make that? A lot of artists have day jobs, right? And so you were all prepared to do that, but then you got a phone call. So what were the early days of Hamilton like? I'm sure everybody wants to know.
Sure. Well, so I mean, I shouldn't skip over the incredible luck of, he called me and I called him back, and he was like, we're putting this thing together. And I had known about, the White House video had been out there, and they had done a concert at Lincoln Center that I was at. And so I knew it was happening. And I hadn't been in touch though with Tommy. And so he called me and he was like, this is happening. He calls me in February, and this is a workshop happening in April, May. And he was like, what are you doing? And I was like, I'm teaching 7th grade. And he was like, this might be tricky. And um, I paced around my Brooklyn apartment as we like sort of talked through this. And finally he goes, well, look, nobody knows the show yet. They don't know the music. They don't know the choreography. This is the first time we've ever done this. So they're going to be sitting and learning for a lot of this process. Like, I don't need you to sit there while they're learning like what their parts are and like what, like where they're going to go on stage. But we're going to do 4 presentations, and that week of presentations, I really need you the full time. We were doing some basic costumes, some basic sets, no lights, no real sound, small band. And I was like, well, what's the week? What's the week that you need me? And he told me, and that just happened to be my spring break. And so for like 3 weeks of that workshop, I would teach until 3 o'clock. I would run to the train. I would get on the train to Union Square so that I could be there for the end of the day of rehearsals. And then that week of the presentations, I was there full time. And we were also really lucky that a lot of times with Broadway musicals, that workshop is to people to give you money so you can do the show. But at that point, the Public Theater and Jeffrey Seller had already decided to do it. So I was able to, after that workshop, I got to finish the school year with my students, leave my school a second time. And at the time it felt crazy, right? That I was like, yeah, I'm gonna go work on this. It's a new hip hop show about Alexander Hamilton, Treasury Secretary. Like, I think it's really exciting. And a weird twist in there is that Notre Dame actually asked me to come back and direct a production right before that. So that fall, that kind of like August, September, I think the show went up in October. And as fate would have it, I cast as one of my leads Austin Swift, who's Taylor Swift's brother. And she came to our closing night, and we were chatting, and she was like, what are you doing next? And I told her, and she was like, interesting. She was like, I've been to a workshop of Finding Neverland. It was strange. And it was thrilling because obviously the music, everybody was what everybody had heard and what everybody knew. And we just knew how special it was. And I spent a lot of those early days trying to catch up because Lynn had been writing for 6 years and Tommy had been there every step of the way. So there were a lot of moments where, somebody says, make some sort of reference to what's going on. And I'm like, what's the next song? What's like, where are we like, it took me a while. And then I really feel like by the time we got to previews, that's, as the associate, I'm sitting there in the dark during the show. Tommy's whispering all of his notes to me. I go home and type them all up. Usually takes me until 3 or 4 in the morning. And then I have to be in by 10 a.m. to work with the lighting team to put those notes in. And then the cast is in at 1 o'clock. Use until 5 o'clock. You take a dinner break and you do it all over again. And it's 2.5 weeks of that. So it was incredible. It was inspiring. It was a blur. And I think that's the thing that both then and now has been thrilling about Hamilton, is that it will take as much as you have as an artist. Like, everything you know how to do, everything you've ever done, you can bring to the show. And so that, and before I forget, that is one thing that I want to say, especially to anyone studying arts and letters of the humanities. I have a job that is sort of my dream job, and it didn't exist when I was in college. I couldn't have ever known that I wanted it or applied for it because it didn't exist. And yet from teaching to political science to every little thing I did along the way, it all has served me in working on this show about American history and and musical theater. And so you don't always know kind of where it's going to take you, but I think that's an exciting thing that is also scary, of course. But I think that if you're studying things for the love of them, and if you're hoping to do something that you're passionate about and you're not sure what it is, it might just be because that's not there yet, and you just got to keep on going until it is.
Oh, that's very lovely. Thank you, Patrick.
Sure.
Do you mind if we take just like maybe one or two questions so we can kind of wrap up in a timely way?
Yeah, and I'm
Yeah,
around, so like I feel like I've talked a lot. So if people have questions, I'm happy to go past 8. Yeah.
we want you to talk. Yeah, so I see one question in the chat box. Bree wants to know who your theatrical heroes are. Do you have theatrical heroes?
That's a good question. I will confess, because I didn't actually go to school for theater and I didn't grow up in New York City or going to theater, I I don't have a go-to answer for that. It's cheesy and whatever, but like I continue to just have so much respect for Tommy Kail, particularly because he was so open when I first started working with him about, I remember having the conversation with him where he said, there will be a day that you think you can do it better, and like that's when you should go. And he's just been so trusting of my work and of me, and so empowering to me, that he's just somebody that I look up to a lot. Other theatrical heroes. That's such George Wolfe is a theatrical hero. He Bring the Noise, Bring the Funk. Ma Rainey's Black Bottom is going to be on Netflix this December. But George, I think, has a sort of singular career as a creator and a director. And I think part of where my brain goes with him too is that I am thinking about the next chapters after Hamilton, and am interested in a kind of career that he's had, where there's writing, there's direction, there's producing, there's kind of a little bit of everything. And it's a little bit more about what do you want to make and who do you want to put together to help you make it, than it is about kind of yourself. Yeah, I'll keep thinking on that. I wish I had a better answer.
That's good. So I see one question that probably lots of people have, which is just, how are you doing in the pandemic? I mean, so we're talking about theater as if it's like live and happening right now, but of course, really, theater is in a state. It's tricky. So how is that affecting your life at all? Are you just kind of future planning all the time, or?
Yeah. So a few things. So there's the work. There's a whole lot of work I feel like I can contribute to within Hamilton, and let me start there, within Hamilton, in terms of how can we be more equitable? How can we be more, inclusive in so many ways? Like one example is that we're talking right now about, the casting process is super unfair. It's like, here, learn these incredibly difficult songs, come into a room to perform them for somebody that you've never met before, and we'll call you, and you'll never know kind of like why you got it or why you didn't. We can do better than that. Like we can I think that there's a lot of things about this. I think one of the hardest things about changing anything in the world is both inertia, but also it's just when things are moving, you can't, it's like trying to work on a car while the engine's still running. There's certain things you're not going to be able to do. So I feel a lot of responsibility for trying to do better there. So Hamilton has hired an HR person, which is not something that normally Broadway shows do. We're looking at hiring an activist who would just work on the social justice sort of aspects of Hamilton. But there's so many things that I think that we can be the example of how we do things better. So that's been a big part of my year. Related to that, kind of in the industry, I'm talking to a lot of folks and working on launching a nonprofit that would specifically support and champion Black musical theater writers. Try to think of any Black musical theater writers, it's not as easy as it should be. And so we're working on something that I think would probably launch kind of beginning of next year. So that's been a big part of my work. And then the actual kind of Hamilton focused work. Well, and I shouldn't skip over, I'm spending a lot of time having conversations with people about ideas for projects, because musicals, movies, things take time. So, like I mentioned before, Lynn was writing Hamilton for 6 years before we walked into a studio. So it's a good time to start thinking about what you want to make and start talking to who you make it with, because you can do that work and then, know that in 2 or 3 or 4 years or whenever it's ready, you can get it up on its feet. So I do have a bunch of projects of my own that I'm trying to get the ball rolling on. I am supposed to go to Germany in December for 2.5 weeks of casting. Germany's been pretty good in their response. It's all going to depend on travel and kind of like what the latest restrictions are. But the hope is that we've done 2 rounds of virtual casting this summer. So it's they see me like this on a flat screen in a studio, and they come in and perform to the screen, me and the music director. And it mostly works. It's surprisingly effective. And then the plan is we're just about done casting Australia, and we'll have to begin with 2 weeks of hotel quarantine. But the plan is to travel right after the first of the year, start rehearsals mid-January. And at the moment, for the last couple of weeks, Sydney, where we're opening, and New South Wales have had zero new cases. So as long as that remains true and we can keep things under control there, our hope is to open at the end of March. And so that's actual work that hopefully will happen, that has been a part of it, but a lot more of it has been how can we do better, and what can we do better, because theater and Broadway are pretty far behind in a lot of ways, including, I think that's a thrill of this year, and I think we're ways away from doing as well as we should. But the Disney Plus movie and a lot of the like digital things that theater is now sharing, I'm hopeful that in the months ahead we get better and better at that, so that it doesn't have to stay this thing where it's like, there's so many amazing productions that I've seen in a little theater somewhere in New York that no one will never know about, and we can do better than that. So I'm trying to engage there as much as I can.
Yeah. So lots of thinking and planning and regrouping and kind of waiting. I admit I was not a believer in the filmed or streamed theater. I was like, I'm not going to watch this. And my spouse actually made me watch something. I was like, oh, this works. Like I was really shocked. I didn't think it would translate, but it seems like we found all kinds of ways to translate. So that is very exciting, and does seem like it would support inclusivity, right? Kinds of ways. So
yeah, that's the hope. Yeah.
All right, so we are coming up on 8 o'clock, and you've been so gracious, but I don't want to hold you over time.
No, that's okay. That's all
Okay.
right. I would stick around if this was in
All right,
person,
let me
and
see if I
I'm
can
already
find.
home, so
That's right. Don't go anywhere. Let me just find one more. Okay, so I have someone who wants to know, if you want to be a musician in a pit orchestra, what do you do? And I understand that you're not necessarily like, you're not the conductor, but what would you recommend? What kind of
So
hustle?
a very timely question. Just today, a new organization launched. It's called Muse.
Mhm.
It's Musicians United for Social Equality. I think I could be getting those words wrong, but it's all of the top Broadway music directors and orchestrators and arrangers. Alex Lacamoire is one of them, but Stephen Aremus and Jason Michael Webb and lots of other people. So if I would Google Muse, because they are specifically looking to help make that process of how you get to be in a Broadway pit more transparent. The little that I can offer basically is being in New York and playing as often as you can, kind of wherever you can.
Mhm.
The way that it works now, and this is another thing we should probably think about and rethink, is when a Broadway show opens, the orchestra is contracted to that show, and you sort of you kind of own your chair as a musician. And so Once the show opens, though, you only have to play a certain number of shows to keep your chair. And so you are responsible for finding subs to play your seat.
Hmm.
So a major way that people get into the business is they kind of network and find people and find ways to audition for a certain chair. If you get to be known as a pretty good sub, then you'll be considered, for a new production when it comes through. So it's a lot of networking and a lot of certainly getting to know the music directors who are hiring those positions. There's also contractors who are responsible for that as well. So it's a pretty small world, but I would say, like anything else in the world, but especially Broadway, everyone's always looking for good people. So if you work hard and you are kind and good to work with, people work their way up pretty quickly. But that's kind of how it works, is you sort of have to find an opportunity to be able to play or audition for somebody who is either looking to fill their seat or is hiring for their pit. But my hope is that this organization Muse is one of the things they're doing is launching a directory where anybody can sign up and sort of offer themselves on this directory for whatever skills they have when people are hiring. So hopefully they'll make it a little bit easier.
Yeah. Although again, it's kind of a similar thing, like seizing opportunity when it's there, right? And hustling. And basically you can't just sit back and be like, well, I hoped someone comes and asks me to audition, right? It's kind of like you got to be out there and networking and being very active. Just one more question that someone put in the chat. I'm just gonna paraphrase, which was, were there ever sort of downsides to your journey in the sense that you're so motivated? Like, how do you keep going? And this may also be partly like a pandemic question. A lot of us have been, it's like, how do you kind of keep doing the thing? Were there particular tricks or strategies or ways that you kind of maintained that fierce internal drive that you seem to have?
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, I feel like the hardest moments for me were in those freelancing days. Look, I'll be honest. My sleep cycle and like my life is much more attuned to theater than it was to teaching. So like there were a lot of those 5 a.m. alarms where I was just like, this. I don't think we're doing this for the rest of my life. Like I just don't know if it's gonna work. Um, but as a teacher, when I wasn't sure or was kind of wondering about theater, I always felt like I was making a difference, and I always felt like there was something there to it. But a really transformative sort of a maybe a tangent, but I'll try to bring it back to this question. I had a lot of guilt about leaving teaching to pursue theater. It felt really selfish to me. It felt really like, here you are, you like teaching, these students really like you, this seems to be going well, and you're going to go be a theater director. Like that's what you think the world needs. And fortunately, I shared an office that year with a really remarkable woman who is now a principal in Baltimore. And she grew up in Brooklyn and she'd been at the school for a long time, and I was kind of talking to her about this and sort of stressing about it. She closed the door and she very clearly said, look, nobody needs you to do what you don't want to do.
Ah,
Like, you're not helping anyone
yeah.
by and you're definitely not helping your students by showing up here if this isn't your dream and this isn't what you want. Your students need to see people pursuing their passions and their dreams. That's what they need to see. And so if this isn't it, like, go do that, because you're not doing anyone any favors here. And that really kind of clicked and like helped me reorient myself. And in those freelancing days, I think that the hardest moments were where it was like, I have no money. I'm not super passionate about like the substitute teaching and like tutoring that, like it's paying the bills, but it's not really like feeding my soul. And I may be working on, a show for money or for, the experience that is also not feeding my soul. And so that's kind of like why I ended up going back to teaching, is it gave me the freedom to be able to pick and choose, because I was pretty good at getting assistant directing jobs, but I was just jumping from job to job, and there wasn't a lot of, in those roles, you don't it's not like you can, sit back and be like, well, I'm not so big on Rodgers and Hammerstein, like I'd rather work on a Sondheim piece. It's like, if they're going to pay you to be the assistant, you're going to show up and do the job. So the going back to teaching, I think that was part of it, was that I wanted to be able to say, like, if I'm going to do this, because it's quite a sacrifice, I want to make sure that it's something that I'm passionate about. And that's, I think a big part of why I'm still working on Hamilton is, it is a show leave in. There's a lot about it that I think has been great, but can be so much better. And I do feel like I'm in a position that I can make that difference. Even now in this moment where for all of, no one in Hamilton has been paid since March. So it's like we're all doing our best, but it's remarkable how many people show up to the Zoom calls and meetings, or are willing to hop on the phone to engage, and that's it's kind of baked into the show, right? It's a show about revolution and making things better. So the process of working on it sort of inspires the same thing. So I think that's a lot of it is, what can I do to help? What can I do to make things better? And that's the stuff that keeps you going when in those moments when you feel like you're not. And I think also can be that guide of, if what am I really doing here? What am I really because and I think that's another important distinction, and I think a really challenging distinction if you're pursuing a creative career, is like there's success, but there's happiness. And so when people leave the business all the time and they move to New Mexico and they have a family, and that's great. Like, or they become a painter, or they, like there's no one thing, but it's for lots and lots of reasons that hopefully we can improve. It's very challenging to be a creative professional or an artist in America right now. And I think it's important to keep an eye on that like if you chase success, it's going to be tough. But if you chase happiness, I think that you can find it a lot faster.
That's very lovely. I think that's a perfect ending point, Patrick. Thank you so much.
Of course, and my I'm very easy to find. My website has my email address, and
Track you
I'm
down.
not on Facebook, but I'm on Twitter and Instagram. So if anybody has any questions or like wants to chat, or if there's anything we didn't cover, please don't hesitate. As I mentioned, I often wrote people cold that I didn't know before, so don't be shy. I'm happy to chat.
All right, thank you. All right, this is the moment when we really need a round of applause, and I don't know how to do it here. But like I said, from the bottom of my heart, thank you. The University of Toledo, thanks to you. John, if you're out there, I'm gonna let you conclude this Zoom since I'm actually not sure how.